Music is a very powerful way to communicate. Songs have been used for centuries as a way to make statements without actually having to say the words. And one of the most poignant examples of this was in the early folk music boom in North America, which came along with the Great Depression in the 1930s. Woody Guthrie was named after American President Woodrow Wilson, and he was destined to use his music to become a voice for marginalized people across the United States. Woody's upbringing in Oklahoma was harsh. His father was a neglectful racist. His mother was suffering from Huntington's disease, and they had no idea what that was at the time. So she just quickly declined, both mentally and physically, to the point where they decided to confine her to a mental institution. His father took off and left the children to fend for themselves in Oklahoma. Woody grew up begging for food, sleeping on back porches, and he learned to play music as a means of obtaining a little bit of money for himself.
Woody, how long was it ago that you were born in Okemah?
28 years. You pretty near guessed it. I was born there on July the 14th, 1912. Year that the President Woodrow Wilson was nominated. Come in there from Texas in the early day. My dad got to Oklahoma right after statehood. He was the first clerk of the county court in Okemah, Oklahoma, after statehood.
Meanwhile, when Woody Guthrie was only 6 years old, America was in the middle of fighting the First World War, and at a military base in New York, a young sergeant named Irving Berlin was writing songs for a musical production meant to mobilize the home front and boost the morale of the American soldiers. One of the songs he wrote was called God Bless America. It was very simple, but the people above him thought the lyrics were a little too cheesy to include in their show, so he threw it in a box at the bottom of his footlocker and forgot about it for 20 years.
God bless America, my home, sweet America, my home, sweet
Fast forward to 1938, and the world is once again facing a major war in Europe. Hitler's anti-Semitic rhetoric was sweeping the world in really terrifying ways. Irving Berlin was Jewish himself, having come to the US from Russia as a child, in an effort to flee persecution. And this wave was making him and millions of other Jewish Americans very nervous. So he thought he should use the only tool that he had to fight oppression, which was his music. So he pulled out God Bless America and gave it to a popular singer called Kate Smith, who sang it for the first time on the 11th of November 1938, the 20th anniversary of the end of the First World War. On the other side of the country, Woody Guthrie had left Oklahoma, first for Texas, where his father lived, where he tried to set up a home for his new wife and 3 children. Like many others during the Depression, Woody Guthrie would get on trains and travel to wherever he could find work. He headed to California, where the migrants were many, and he met many people, and he heard many stories about people who'd been affected by the economy and the devastating effects of the Dust Bowl. It was around this time that he started to play folk songs meant to uplift the struggle of the low-income people who were hit the hardest by the Depression. His Dust Bowl refugee songs would make him famous among farmers and working-class Americans. In 1939, Kate Smith's version of God Bless America became extremely popular. It became a rallying cry for a world as they headed into a very uncertain war. Radio stations everywhere were playing the song nonstop, and Woody Guthrie had recently moved to New York City in an effort to find like-minded individuals and to join the Greenwich Village folk scene. God Bless America was making Woody Guthrie want to pull his ears off. It was just 6 lines repeated over and over again, and he thought it was extremely sappy, totally ignorant of the plight of the tens of millions of Americans who were living in poverty, many of whom were veterans, most of whom were children, farmers who'd lost everything, laid off factory workers, families who were being wiped out by hunger and disease. And it made Woody Guthrie angry to see such blind patriotism when so many Americans were suffering. So he did literally the only thing he knew how to do. He wrote a song. Originally, he wanted the title to be God Blessed America for Me, a direct slap in the face to the Berlin song, referencing the fact that God may or may not have forgotten about a few Americans when he was blessing the land. And he planned to end every verse that way too. But upon reflection and realization that this might make people a little bit uncomfortable and was maybe too confrontational, he changed it to This Land Is Your Land and ended the verses with This land was made for you and me, which made the song a little easier to swallow and would help avoid the inevitable censorship.
This Land Is Your Land was never played on the radio, never played on TV. No famous person ever recorded it. It did, however, get into schools, and some school songbooks printed it. And the kids loved it, and 15 years later, there were literally millions of kids all around the country who knew this song. It's true, I used to take it everywhere I went and sing it. Margie Guthrie, on her deathbed, she said, "Thank you, Pete, for spreading Woody's songs."
He wanted to make a complicated point. He loved America. He agreed it was a magical place where dreams could come true. But he wanted to pose an equally compelling question about who had access to this magic and why. He asked these questions in a critical way. Can we have an America that is both beautiful and also compassionate? He played it a few times in New York, initially to little reaction, and then he shoved it in a drawer and forgot about it for 4 to 5 years. And during that time, a lot happened in America. The attack on Pearl Harbor and the subsequent entering of the country into the war that they tried so hard to stay out of. Political climate had shifted too. Roosevelt was dying. Japanese internment camps, horrific stories from the Pacific. And now they were starting to hear about Nazi concentration camps. Woody Guthrie had gone through a lot during that time too. He played at many farm worker benefits and eventually met Pete Seeger and landed a regular spot on a CBS radio program. He used his influence to help support his friend Hoodie Ludbetter, who he developed a close relationship with while busking together in Harlem. He also moved across the country whenever he needed to support the underground movements and to use his public voice to communicate their message over the radio broadcasts, in his writing, and through his songs.
They wrote songs for lovers. They wrote songs for jumping up and down mindlessly too. They wrote songs for thinking about. They wrote songs about political events, about social events, about everything that was going on in their life. They saw music as being an expression of not just one, it wasn't just entertainment, to keep the kids off the street or something like that. Music was a way of life for these people.
All through the show, when we've talked about the farm situation, we've been using the phrase, "this land is our land." The exact line never appears in the Woody Guthrie song that inspired it, but that's exactly what Woody was saying. And that's what we're going to say as we close the show with Woody's love song to America. And joining me is Woody's son, Arlo Guthrie, and some other good friends. Arlo, take it away, pal. As I went walking that ribbon of highway, I saw above me an endless skyway, and I saw below me a golden valley. This land was made for you and me.
He served briefly as a merchant marine and was commissioned by the Army to write songs to support the American soldiers. So in early 1944, the war effort is at its peak because war was coming to an end and therefore everything was ramping up. At the time, Woody Guthrie had a regular spot on a radio show called Songs for John Doe, which was basically an hour of songs of stories meant to boost morale. So he pulled out his old song, "This Land Is Your Land," removed the verses that were critical of America, like the ones about hunger and land ownership, and recorded it for the show. Over the years, different verses were added and subtracted, depending on the political and economic climate and the statement that he was trying to make at that time. But the core value of the song remained true. America is beautiful, but don't let anyone ever tell you that it's not yours and that you deserve every opportunity made possible by this land, just as much as anyone else.
Some crazy way they've got looking at the colored situation. Ever since I was a kid growing up, I've always found time to stop and talk to these colored people because I found them to be full of wisdom. The common everyday feeling down in that country, is that for some strange reason there's some people born a little bit better than others, and some are supposed to work pretty hard, and others are supposed to sort of coast through life somewhere or other.
After the war, the song blew up and became an anthem for anyone who had an interest in social justice and activism, and any American who wasn't willing to submit to blind patriotism without the freedom and the justice and the equality and the opportunity that they'd been promised would come with it.